Okay, welcome along to our final hour here for this afternoon. And for that, now we want to start focusing on the security aspect here. So hopefully everybody here, I'm not going to dwell on the problem. Hopefully everybody is relatively familiar with the problem. There's some good examples out there of how this can affect a business. The first one's a really good example of how the impacted tradie is out $102,000, not 51, because obviously they've lost the initial 51. Now they've got to make up another 51 to pay for the items that they thought they originally paid for. Again, as I've mentioned, attackers don't care. They're after the money. They're going to go after nurseries, hospitals, schools. Don't care if it's easy money. They're going to do that. They're also going to target largely on-prem environments because, again, they're usually slow to be patched, aren't as well monitored. So, again, if you do have on-prem, you're really going to be up against it when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, that does not necessarily mean the cloud isn't a target. It is a target, and the reason is simply that most people do not go in and alter any of the defaults. So just leave the tenant set up by default, which is really inadequate for a modern environment. Same thing with a server. You wouldn't take a standard Windows server, set up, install, and put it naked on the internet. Same thing with Microsoft 365. Microsoft has, for example, started to lock these things down slowly over time. They've introduced security defaults, which turns on MFA, forces basic auth to be turned off. They're also removing basic auth, but because of the pandemic and delays and all that sort of stuff and taking a softly approach, it's taken a lot longer than we think. So these changes do happen very, very slowly, but they impact a lot of tenants. So there's an opportunity there to go in and be far more proactive about this. And because it's a common platform, it does make it much easier to automate and go in and talk to customers about. Now, hopefully you've seen this before from me, that when you do speak to a customer, you need to put security in a language that they understand. And the easiest way to do that is to show them this triangle and say, right, which two sides do you want? You can't have all three. So if you want it secure and cheap, it's not going to be usable. If you want it usable and cheap, it ain't going to be secure. So the takeaway here is security is not an absolute. It's going to be a compromise. You're going to have to compromise something to improve security. So MFA is a good example. So MFA is cheap. It's included in every single tenant, and it is also secure. So 99.9% of all attacks are generally mitigated if MFA was in place. And most attacks you see these days didn't have MFA enabled. But there is a trade-off with usability. Yes, you've got to put an additional rolling number in or verify something on your phone. So there is a trade-off against usability, but that's small compared to the additional security that it provides. So resellers can go in and provide value around minimizing the impact or improving the usability. So, using things like Windows Hello for Business, using YubiKeys, using all of those sort of things to minimize the impact to customers, but keeping them secure. All right. But at the end of the day, security is going to be a compromise. There is no absolute. No reputable security company will tell you they can provide you 100% protection. It's just not possible. You should run far and run fast from anybody who promises 100% security. It's a compromise. The other thing is it's also going to be a journey. So that means that over time, things are going to change. So we have some, misunderstandings in this day and age about security. So again, the cloud is far more secure, again, when configured appropriately than on-prem, simply because the vast amount of signals that are being fed into that and the power that can be thrown against those signals is far more than you could do on-prem. And that information can be shared across multiple tenants. So again, think about the amount of signals Microsoft has about logins, people accessing and using their products. They can feed that into their AI and begin to see trends, begin to see things they may need to investigate or alert or take actions on. So you do need to, again, look at the approach that you're taking when it comes to security and make sure that it is current, it is up to date, and you're utilizing the best tools that are available to you. Now, of course, with that, some things don't change. Some basics about security don't change. So we've known how to secure, valuables by, basically creating a drawbridge, putting in a moat, creating high walls, building multiple, walls and fences to get over, positioning defenders high above attackers. So a lot of these things still apply. So, applying best practices are very similar to what we've always done. But again, the idea is to understand any changes and adjustments that may need to be made in this new environment and the tools that now are available to you. So again, it's all about signals, right? It's all about looking at the data and looking for behavior changes, right? Old world AVs with signatures, they're useless, absolutely useless, simply because the attackers know how to get around that sort of security. So it's all about behaviors. Why did Joe log in Tokyo at 6 o'clock this morning? He's never done that before. Or why did he log in from Turkey when he's based in Australia? So as this slide indicates, the takeaway here is that the vast majority of attacks are going to come from email. So the two key things are your attacker is going to largely come from email and largely going to be trying to get the user to run something on their machine. So they're the two vast majority of reasons or things you need to protect against. That's the low-hanging fruit. If you can, again, prevent that, your chances of getting pwned are pretty low. Now, the reality is when an attacker gets access to a system, they don't change passwords, they don't go and deface websites, they sit there and they gather intelligence. They're looking for who writes the checks, where's the money, okay? And they can sit in there for an extremely long period of time and be very patient and have that information exfiltrated quickly and easily. So again, part of this is, okay, if an attacker is going to exfiltrate data, how are they going to do it? Well, they're typically going to set up an email forwarding rule so they can see the information being sent. Well, how about we set up some sort of alert to let us know when stuff is being forwarded out or when there's email forwarding rules? So again, being pragmatic about this, a lot of this can be solved very easily with very simple processes. But again, people just don't seem to do them. So the challenges largely for the people defending are simply the volume of information. Okay, so you're getting billions of signals to go through. Now, if you're and your team are looking at these signals individually, signal by signal by signal, then that's an ineffective use of your resources. You want to be leveraging the machines, the AI, to be looking at all the signals day in and day out, and then basically telling you, you know what, you should worry about this, or this doesn't look good, or take this action. You shouldn't be deluging yourself or your team with millions of alerts. So, for example, there was a reseller I talked to who complained to me that they were getting too many signals from their tools, their alerting, their RMM. So their solution was to set up a script to delete all of the mailbox data for all of their texts every morning. So they have a fresh mailbox full of alerts for the next day. That's not solving the problem, right? That's really, like I said, ignoring the problem, and it's only going to get worse. So the idea here is to be pragmatic about, okay, what's the important thing? What do we need to pay attention to? How do we filter through the vast majority of false positives to find the needle in the haystack? Where are the tools to allow us to achieve that? So our attackers out there are going to get as sophisticated and keep moving the ball. So the idea here, it's a cat and mouse game. Have you got the latest tool? So using an AV engine, he's just not going to cut it. You're going to go straight through that. Now, if I'm an attacker and I want to ransomware you, the approach that I would take is to, once I've got control of your system, I'm going to want to basically run an encryption tool. So why would I ever bother with running or downloading a encryption program from outside the organization to your machine, which could be detected? A much smarter approach is going to be to run an inbuilt tool like Cipher. So Cipher is a Microsoft tool that encrypts files. So I can use that as an attacker in a what's called live off the land attack to encrypt your files. So if you open your DOS prompt now and you type Cipher, then a question mark like I've got there, you should get that response. You should not get a load of information. Also, if you run MSHTA, so this is a Microsoft utility that I can then use to disguise running a script. And again, if you run MSHTA, you should end up with the result that I showed there. The system should not be able to execute those tools. There is no legitimate reason for Cipher or MSHTA to run on the majority of systems. So if you have not got the result that you see there, then your system is vulnerable. Pure and simple. Okay, so simple things like preventing the attacker from being able to run inbuilt encryption tools, inbuilt utilities, will make their job harder. Okay, and reduce, not eliminate, reduce the chance of you being pwned or your customers being pwned. But simple steps are not being taken. Now, the big advantage here with Microsoft is, as I said, billions and billions and billions of signals. Okay, that can be used to help identify issues. So let me just show you another example here. Let me just get the right environment. So one of the tools that we'll talk about, which I think that, again, more people should be looking to implement, is something called Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is a service which will suck in logs and events from lots of places and then run analysis over it. We'll look at this in more detail. But for example, one of the things you can do is you can set Azure Sentinel up to ingest threat intelligence tools. So these threat intelligence feeds look at known bad IP addresses, known bad domains that appear in botnets or whatever, and then I can suck those into my environment here, and then I can check all of my traffic effectively or interactions with my environment to see whether any of these IP addresses that are known to be bad appear in any of the logs for my environment. And that's going to indicate a potential compromise in the environment. So at the end of the day, it's all about sucking in as much signals as you can and using the technology, the tools, to be able to analyze that and get that down to something which is actionable for a human being. Okay, so how far up the chain are you working? Are you working at the event level, or are you working at the output level where you've only got a few major alerts that you need to worry about? Because you'll very quickly become overloaded unless you've got some sort of filter on all of this information. Now, on top of all of that, we've also got growing requirements from governments around the need to protect customer data. So the National Data Breach legislation has been around for a couple of years now, and basically, again, it's going to want you or your customers to protect information like, you know, Medicare numbers, tax file numbers, and so on. Now, if you read the recent report from the privacy department in the government, you'll see that it says this: a failure by both the MSP and its clients to notify the OAIC, right, basically will represent a breach of the Privacy Act. So if you have a customer who is pwned and the customer doesn't report it and you don't report it and that gets found out, you could be found to be in breach of the Privacy Act. So this is where this concept of creating a standard, going to the market and saying, we conform to all the known standards for these reasons, and if you want us to look after your environment, then this is what we'll need to do to be secure. If you don't want to do that, then we are better off parting ways and finding someone else, because there is legal liability if we do not do this. So again, there is going to be more and more emphasis, more and more requirements placed on you as an IT provider because you are the person or you are the people that is responsible for your customer security. They're just going to say, look, I trusted my IT provider. They're the ones that did it. I trusted them. I paid them to do it. That was their responsibility. That was the agreement. So again, if you take this on, make sure that you've got your T's and your C's covered and your I's and your T's dotted and crossed. Because if there is a breach, insurance companies get involved, then the lawyers will be coming and asking you very hard questions. So again, you need to be serious about security, and that seriousness is largely shown by processes, checklists, and processes that are followed strenuously. Now, I always like to have a model to work out where security is, what's important, and this is the one I like to use because it shows that the data is largely protected by things like its identity, the device, the service like Microsoft 365, but through all of these is punched things like email. So email needs to save data. So if you're an attacker, the easiest way through all these defenses is to send an email, because anybody can send an email to any user, and what's the chance of the user opening it? Pretty good. So again, we've got to think about this defense in depth. We've got to protect it from every point that we can all the way through. But what are those points? What are those ways that an attacker is going to get to us? And the most likely one is going to be email, without doubt. And that is the place that you should be starting. Now, this is a really good diagram from New Zealand Cert. This gives you an idea of, like I said, the initial access is typically, like I said, phishing, password guessing, and so on, and then how it flows through and the impact. Always a good thing to talk to your customer and show them as a diagram. Another one here that I like is this one from Microsoft, which will show you that on the left-hand side, the majority of access is going to come from malicious email with some sort of executable. By far, over 90% is that's where the attack's going to come from. Yes, there will be some, password guessing potentially, and yes, there are USB attacks, but again, close the biggest hole, which is going to be around security first. Okay, and then worry about everything else from there. Because once they get into email, then they can, move across email boxes. They can, basically move across machines, steal credentials, modify documents. And again, at the end of the day, they're after money, and they'll stay in there as long as they can to get that money. Now, one of the questions I always ask people who are looking after the security for a customer when I'm asked to come in there and evaluate it is, okay, you say you're looking after the customer's security, but what standards do you follow? Show me what you refer to. What are you basing your security on? Now, that can be from a range of different places. Essential 8 is very popular. Microsoft has plenty of security best practices. There is the US NIST and the CISA settings as well there. But you should hold yourself accountable to some well-known standard, both inside your own organization and for all sides of your customers. And you should be able to point to that and say, this is what we're following. Because again, if you're questioned and you come and say, well, I've just made this up, I thought 5 was better than 3, so that's what I picked, that's going to be very hard to justify. Yes, it does require time and effort and understanding, but you are going to be held accountable to these industry standards. So get in there, learn them, understand them, pick 1 or 2 and base your processes around that. So the practical side is, where should you start? As I've talked about many, many times, the first place to start is to go out and have a look at Secure Score, right? So again, the idea here is if we go into let's go into this other tenant. All right, so if I go into my security, so let's go into our security option here. And inside our security, we will find an option here for security, Secure Score. Now, the idea with this is, again, I don't know why it doesn't like this. Oops, looping around. Okay, so let's go back to the other one. And let's see what happens here. I've had this happen before, so let me see if I can pull this up. Otherwise, I will go into a production machine. Let's have a look here. Doesn't seem as though it wants to. Yep. All right. Doesn't like me. I must have locked that down. So let's go over here and go to Office 365 and then pull that down. And then go into security. Hopefully that's a bit better. There we go. Inside our security area here, you will find a secure score. Thank you very much. And then another commercial. Thank you very much. Go into secure score down here, and this will give your tenant a score as a percentage. And that is basically taking into account every single capability that that tenant has. And again, the bottom number here in this percentage will tell you the total capability. Now, my advice is going to include and select the option here for current license score. That will show you the maximum score you could get if you implemented all the security features that you are currently licensed for. But this is your base starting point. All right, what is the secure score, A, of your own tenant, and B, of all your customers' tenants? Once you've got that up to snuff, then you can go and look at prospects and, again, start with this question, what's your secure score? Now, the good thing about secure score is that you'll see here under improvement action, it tells me what I need to do. This is a Microsoft list and the recommendation. If I click on this, it will go in here and tell me what do I need to do step by step to make this more secure. And you'll see there are hundreds of options in here that you can go in and accept. Now, maybe this doesn't apply. So you can go in here and you can go in and say, you know what, I've accepted the risk or I've resolved it through a alternate means, and you would type in the information there. So again, you should be using secure score as your base to look at the value, but also record the actions. We can also look at the history over time, and we can also look at the metrics. So I can compare it to other people like me. So other organizations at the moment on average are 45, where this demo tenant is only 18. Okay. So you'll find that again in the security area, and it's in secure score. At the end of the day, it's all about a single score for making things easy for customers and people to understand how secure they are. So you'll see here there's things like secure score. If I go into, let's hope it works this time. Let's go into security. Oh, that didn't work, did it? Okay, let's try this once more. Let's see if I can go into security here. You'll find it in Defender for Endpoint. You'll find it in Azure AD. So again, if we go into Defender, oh, that's the admin side of it. If we go into the, let's see if we can get to security. But at the end of the day, it's coming down to a, to a single, to a single score that you can access in here. So secure score is definitely the place to start doing that. My advice to you is to go in and look at your own secure score first, get that up to scratch, and then do your customers, get them up to scratch, and then use that as a marketing tool going forward. Now, the second option I've called out here is the conditional access, right? Sorry, MFA. Right, so hopefully I don't have to tell everybody about MFA, but you'd be surprised the percentages, and we'll talk about this in more detail. But again, MFA reduces the risk by 99.9 or 99% or more. If you went to a horse race and someone told you the chances of this horse winning are 99%, you pretty much take that bet. So if it could be boiled down to one thing you can do, MFA, and you should have MFA everywhere on everything. Is it perfect? No security is perfect, but again, it's going to make things a lot tougher for attackers to get in if you do have MFA. So hopefully I don't have to preach the value of MFA to everybody here. We'll look at some statistics and how to make it easier to work with, but at the end of the day, it really is a must-have. Now, the last one is conditional access. So hopefully everybody here is familiar with what conditional access is. But let me just show you here on this demo tenant. So the idea with conditional access is to go in and create a policy that determines whether access is allowed. So we can go in here and say, rightio, for example, we can go in and we can say that, are users allowed to get to this information if their risk is at a certain level, or if they're on a certain device, or if they're from a certain location. So in my case, I restrict logins at the moment to a single IP address in my home office. Now, because I'm not traveling, that means that my environment is more secure, because if an attacker did manage to somehow get in, they've got to be on my office's IP to get to any information. Now, as things open up, I will have to probably expand that to being different locations, Australia, whatever. But in many cases, you can lock down users to a single known location. All right. We've also got the ability to lock down apps. We've also got the ability to lock it down per device state. So we can say here, is it Azure AD joined? And this is, again, we can also go in and now filter for our devices as well. So we've got that sort of granularity control. We can also look at, do we grant or block access? And when we grant, we require a compliant device. So even if they get access with login and password, they need a device which is Azure AD joined, has compliance policies, is MDM enrolled, and so on. So again, there's lots and lots of options that you can add in here to really lock down your data. And then the last one here is to have a look at this option here. When it comes up, hopefully, you'll see here that we've got the ability to use conditional access app control. And we've also got the ability here to customize continuous access evaluation. So one of the big advantages of conditional access now is that you can enable it for continuous evaluation. So when you log in, login's evaluated once, password is evaluated once, MFA is evaluated once. Now, if the user or the attacker can steal your token, your authorized token, then they can take over the session and they can be you. But if I turn on continuous access evaluation, that means that that token will be continuously verified that it is valid. If it's not, then access will be removed. So think of, I spin up my desktop or my laptop here, I close it and go to the coffee shop. Because I've got a whitelisted IP address at my office and not at the coffee shop, I'm going to be blocked. So again, conditional access is an extremely powerful capability that is really going to be, it should be one of the cornerstones of your security strategy. And conditional access is something that is provided and is enabled and available with Microsoft 365 Business Premium. Okay, so it's included in Microsoft 365 Business Premium. Otherwise, you're going to have to go out and purchase Azure AD P1 and add it to your licenses, but it is part of Microsoft 365 Business Premium. Now, we can apply conditional access to any request, a web browser, a device. It really is the way to now begin controlling access on a continuous basis for the whole environment. So again, item number 1, secure score. Item number 2, MFA. Item number 3, conditional access, which you obtain all with Microsoft 365 Business Premium. Now, a common question is, well, what's a good secure score? So my advice to you is that a minimum you should be aiming for is 65. If your own tenant is not at least at 65 or above, your tenant is not at best practices. Out of the box, most tenants are 16 to 18. So that's what you get out of the box. The worst I've ever seen was 0. Okay, so I've seen secure scores of tenants of customers who are looked after by cybersecurity Microsoft 365 experts, and their secure score was 0. But out of the box, it should be 16 to 18. If it's below 65, you aren't at best practices, and really, you should be at 80% or above. So you should be aiming to get to 80% or above for yourself, then for your customers, then for every prospect that you deal with. Now that's going to change, that's going to adjust, that's going to depend on, security issues as they're found. But like I said, you should be aiming for a minimum of 80%, I would suggest, as a benchmark. And don't forget to go in and select the option there to look at the achievable score and the current license score to get an idea of the maximum that the license is. Because again, if I'm doing an evaluation of the tenant on behalf of the customer, they're the things I'm going to look at. What's the secure score and what have they got turned on or enabled that they're paying for? Is there stuff that hasn't been turned on or enabled that the customer is paying for? All right. So all of the security stuff is going to be in the Security Compliance Center, which is getting a makeover or moving into a new area. The first place to start is to make sure your audit logs are enabled. Okay, so if you go into the Security Center, go in and look at audit on the left-hand side there, you should not see that blue banner. You basically should not see something like this. What you want to see is the capability to go in and query these logs to be able to look at information. So again, if we go to this one, okay, so if we go in here and we look at our, go in and are we in the right place? Let's have a look here. Here we go, audit. Okay, so if we go in here, we should be able to go in and basically do a search for, the different activities between a different time and all that sort of stuff. So you can see in this case, so I'll go in here and say, let's see if we can see there are any activities. So a user changed their password, okay, or reset their password or whatever. Who's the user? Okay. And again, go off and do a search and see if anything basically comes back from that. Now they call it a unified audit log, which means it's sucking logs in from Teams, Exchange, devices, applications, Office, everything. Okay, so it's going to give you that capability to search across your environment. So job number one is to go in and turn your audit logs on and make sure that they're on so you can investigate and you can find information around security if you need to. A surprising number of tenants have auditing disabled, and Microsoft doesn't turn a lot of that on because if you don't look at it, why should they pay for it or use disk space? There's no cost to you for turning it on. Go and turn it on. It should be number one checkpoint when you're setting up security after MFA and conditional access to make sure that your audit logs are turned on. Now, the other place to go and look for your audit logs is in your Azure AD. So you'll need to go into Azure AD. We talked about the skill set to understand Azure AD. And if you go into sign-ins here, you'll go in and you'll see all the logins, all the activities, right? So again, if we pop over here and go to, we're in Azure here. So if I go into my Azure AD, go into my sign-ins down here on the left-hand side, you'll see these are all the logs. You'll see that I can look at the last 24 hours. I can add filters. So what I can do is I can go in here and say status, and I can change that to failure. So now it's going to tell me any failures in that time period, right? So I can see no failures in there. Now, what I can also do is, for example, add a filter and look at the client app. And now I can go in here and look at my legacy authentication, these old world protocols. I can select all of those, and then I can see whether there are any clients in my environment that are using these antiquated protocols that I should be blocking. So there's none at this stage. Now you'll see that I can export the data here if I want to, and I can download it as a JSON or a CSV as well to do additional analysis. So the two places for raw logs, as I said, are going to be the unified audit log. Make sure that's turned on. It's not on by default. And then look at your Azure AD and become familiar with those loggings. That is on by default. Now, there is some limitations around the logging depending on the plan that you have. So if you have cheap and cheerful Microsoft 365, you've only got 7 days worth of logs. But if you have Microsoft 365 Business Premium, you're going to get 30 days. So we can query 30 days because that has Azure AD P1. If you have E5, you'll be able to get basically up to 90 days. Okay, so again, the amount of logs that are retained, the period, depends on the license that you have. So Business Premium is going to give you 30 days. E5 is going to give you 90 days. Now you can actually extend that even further by adding something like Azure Sentinel. Azure Sentinel will give you 90 days of logging for free. You've got the ability to do log shipping as well, so you can push it into other storage locations if you want. But out of the box, generally, you'll be getting 30 days worth of logs in your Azure AD. Now, the mailbox auditing logs also, not all of those are turned on. So if you go in and have a look at this link down the bottom, you'll see here that there are three styles of permissions: admin, delegate, and owner. And some of them are turned on, some of them are not turned on by default. Okay, so for example, the copy action is not is tracked if it's an admin copy, but not if it's a delegate and not if it's an owner. So again, unless these are turned on, the copy action will not produce a logging event that you can track. So the simple answer is go in and turn all those logs on. It doesn't cost you anything. Means that all that information will appear in your log so you can get access to it. All right, and the downside is the only way you can turn on all those logs is to use PowerShell. It can't be done in the user interface. And that's why, again, Microsoft probably, again, sets as what it thinks is a best practice and leaves you to look up the tools, to use the tools. But once you work out how to do it once with PowerShell, then you save it as a script and you rerun it over and over and over again on every tenant. You run it once and you turn all that logging on. So unified audit logs on, verify the Azure AD logs, and then turn on all your mailbox logs, all of them, all the options, everything you can, turn it up to the max. There's no downside to not doing that. Okay? And again, it's not on by default. Luckily, with SharePoint and OneDrive and so on, the audit logs are already turned on. There's nothing you need to do with the file management. So the files will always appear, in that environment. Okay. So again, the easiest way for me to demo this is to show you that what I've done here is written a script to do that. So the first thing that I'll need to do is to firstly connect to Exchange Online. So let me connect to Exchange Online. Log in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run, I'll just show you a couple of scripts. These scripts are all freely available. So this connection script you see here is freely available. These ones that I'll show you here are freely available. Find that on my GitHub repo. So if you go to ./O365-MX, okay, so what I'm going to do here is do a mailbox check. You'll see that what this does is it loops through all the mailboxes and tells you what settings are enabled. So you'll see that the audit logs for this mailbox are currently 90. They could be extended. You'll see that, for example, there's another mailbox here. You'll see that this has a forwarding address on it, which means that it's forwarding an email outside the organization, which is not a good thing. Okay, so it's going to give me that sort of quickly and easily. I can export that to a CSV file. So another one, -mx-user is okay. That's a quick version of that, which I didn't want to do. The other one, which I'll show you, which again is a free script, O365-EXO. This one here will check the forwarding on every mailbox. There are 3 ways to forward from a mailbox: using the mailbox, using Outlook rules, and using something called sweep. This script will go and verify all of those and tell you if you've got a problem and something that you need to go and investigate. So again, the idea behind this is I can run this as an automation across all the tenants every single night, and that can produce a report, come back to me and tell me where I've got anything to worry about. There are other ways to do this sort of checking, but again, if you have the control to do it, with your own capabilities, and that's again a value add. You can do it quicker, cheaper, faster than most people. All right, so in essence, okay, Microsoft 365 Business Premium is going to give you multi-factor capabilities, secure score, conditional access, continuous evaluation of that conditional access. It's going to give you at least 30 days worth of log retention on your Azure AD. Make sure you go in and turn on your unified audit logs. And that's probably the starting point for making sure that all your logging, the base logging abilities of your tenants are enabled. There's certainly more that we can do. But before I move on, I just want to verify, is everybody happy with that? Is there anything that I need to cover off in more detail there before we move on? All right, so I don't see any questions or hands up, so I will consider that everybody's good. So quickly before we end off for today, let's talk about alerts. So these are the base level alerts that are generated by the tenant. They can be sent to any email address that you want. And you'll see here that there are a range of them that are provided. You can create your own custom ones. So if you look at a list inside a tenant, you'll see something called protection alerts. And you'll see there are two sorts of protection alerts. There is the Microsoft provided ones, which are the bold ones, the lower one. And there are the custom ones that are the ones, in normal font above it. So you can take the default protection alerts, and you can also go in and add your own if you want. Now, the number of alerts provided by default in the tenant depends on the license. So E5 has more default alerts than Business Premium, which has more alerts than Business Basic. So my advice again on alerts is to, okay, what do we need to know about? It may seem as though you want to know about everything, but you've got to be realistic here. Too many alerts is just as bad as too few alerts. So again, what are important things to be notified about? Now, apart from protection alerts, there is also something called activity alerts. There are no activity alerts by default in a tenant. You would need to go and configure those. And again, too many is not a good thing. So what makes sense here? Now, one of the ones I really like in activity alerts is this one here called Company Information Alert. So that will tell you, for example, is when you're removed as a partner of record from the tenant. That might be an indication that you're about to be changed as the IT provider, basically, for the customer. So again, the way that we find those is if we go into here. Actually, let me go and find that. Where's that tenant, which is already open here? Here it is. So if we go into, where are we? Here. That's the emails, that's the policy, that's the audits. Maybe I've got to go, where are they? Oh, they're probably down the bottom here. Here we go. Incidents and alerts. So you'll see here that this is where I would go in, and these are the alerts that have been generated. Okay, so I can go in and have a look at, those alerts that I've set up coming from my different services. Right, now where are the ones that I want? I think they might be under this one? No, where are they? Maybe they're under policies. Here we go. I think they're under policies now. Let's have a look. New interface, excuse me. Oh, there we go. Alert policy. That's the one I want. So this is where I would go in and set up these alerts. You'll see I can create a new alert policy here, put in the details, the severity. Okay, so let's go in and just call this test and go next. And then I can go in here and what's the activity? What do I want an alert on? And then it can go in and obviously, send me an email. These are the default ones. So these are the Microsoft ones, the bolded ones. The only thing I can do basically if I want to edit it is to turn it off. I can't go and really edit much else in there. So that's the advantage of the customized reports if I want. But again, just have a look at what's in there and be very careful about overloading yourself. And then you'll see the option for activity alerts here. And these are the custom activity alerts that I've set up as well. Similar sort of concept. I go in there and then configure them to look for certain circumstances. Now, the other thing you'll see that I've done here is I name the alert with the domain. So if I'm sucking them in from multiple domains, from multiple customers, I know which alert has come from who. So again, think about that if you're looking to bring in lots of alerts from lots of different places. So again, have a look at what alerts you get out of the box. Consider what custom alerts you want. There may be some limitations around those alerts depending on the SKU that you have, and be aware that you can also automate those alerts via PowerShell. So you can run a PowerShell script and enable your preferred custom alerts using PowerShell, so that every tenant that you set up will have those customized alerts. You can send those alerts to any email address that you nominate, and that can be to your ticketing system. That could be to a tool like Azure Sentinel or whatever. So you've got that that capability inside there. All right, so we're pretty close to the end of our initial session here. So tomorrow we'll continue on and we'll talk about, where's the attacker going to come from. As I've mentioned, they're going to come from email largely. How are you protecting that? And the reason that it's email is because people will click on anything, and also, again, their passwords are generally pretty weak. And, email was never designed to be secure, and that's why it makes it really tough to defend against. But we can do that, but we need to look at defense in depth. So there's a range of things that we need to enable to make sure our environments are more secure. And again, it's just a matter of working through. None of these one things alone will solve every problem, but doing them in unison as a defense in depth strategy is certainly going to reduce the chance of something getting through there quite significantly. And then if you add in, multi-factor authentication and up-to-date and all those sort of things, then again, it reduces the chances dramatically. So at the end of the day, you need to think about this as, okay, where's my most likely attack? What do I need to defend against it? And what's the low-hanging fruit? What are the simple things I can do to protect my environment, my customers quickly and easily? And generally, you'll find the majority of tools are already available to you to achieve that. And I don't understand today why systems are still being ransomware. That just doesn't make sense to me, because all the capabilities to prevent that are available in all the common operating systems. So it means they're just not being turned on. So the technology is there. It's just a failure to implement these sort of tools. All right, with that, we've got 10-ish minutes left before the scheduled end of days here. We'll be back again tomorrow at the same time. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll continue on with the security side of the discussion here. We'll look at some more advanced options like Azure AD P2, Azure Sentinel. Some of these I'll also, if time permits, talk about how you can package up these sort of deals and provide them to customers rather than just selling licenses. So again, that is the aim for us to run through tomorrow. Hopefully today's provided value for you and you've got lots of good information there. The slides will be available to you after the fact, and that will probably be early next week, as George indicated. Okay. So the question is, if we want more demos, at the end of the day, the idea would be is I'm going to be doing more and more demos as we get into the more technical side of it. So again, I need to set the base here and make sure everybody's on the same page. They understand what the products are, what they do. And as we get deeper into it, there will be more, specific demos. But remember, it's being recorded. If you can't make it tomorrow, just speak to Ingram next week, and I'm sure they can provide you the recordings which you can dig into. But again, I need to set a base so that everybody here is on the same page and we're building on that, and that will take a little bit of setting up, but I've tried to do as many demos and show you the interfaces as I can today. But if you want any specific demos, then now's the time to speak up and let me know so I can prepare them for tomorrow. Okay. Any other questions? Queries? Okay, so this is a long one. We have a client that migrated to Microsoft 365 in Google Workspace, and the data was on-prem NAS, was mapped to a network drive. Okay, so you shouldn't map to a network drive. That's not best practice. They They have a lot of objects and some are quite large in size. They have easily exceeded the object scaling limit of OneDrive client. So again, it's not best practice to bulk sync. You need to selectively sync what is required and look to opening direct from the web. So again, bulk syncing is generally not best practice. So there are a lot of other solutions out there if you want to choose. I would suggest to you that it's a matter of transforming the data rather than migrating it. If the customer wants to work with an S drive like they've always worked, set up an Azure VM, site-to-site VM, a site-to-site VPN, and then they just use it the way they used to. So as I said, with the migration, it's all about transformation, not just migration. If the customer doesn't want to do the transformation, put a VM in Azure, map an S drive across a site-to-site VPN, and then you're done. So I remember that SharePoint Teams is about collaboration, a modern approach to working. If they want to work the old way, then SharePoint Teams or whatever is probably not the best solution, and an Azure VM with a big disk is probably a much better solution. Thank you, Benjamin. So at the end of the day, the idea here is are you in the business of transformation or are you in the business of migration? And yes, some customers are going to be, challenging in that respect, but you should approach each one with, hang on, we want to show you how to get the most out of these tools to make the most of it. But if they are resistant and just want somewhere to put files that are not on-prem, that's probably a decision you need to say, well, we're not that sort of business. We're about enabling you with the modern workplace. If you want to stay with the old workplace, then maybe that's, we're not the business for you. Because again, what you will find is that if you do map drives, if you do approach it the old way, and again, moving data and then syncing everything in bulk back to the desktop is going to cause you a world of pain because you're not transforming, you're just migrating and trying to keep it the way it was, and that's never going to be successful with the new tools that are made available. They're not designed with that approach. They're designed with a transformation in mind. So Rob's got a question. I have a client that I've changed actions like allow users to change passwords or set passwords to never expire, but Secure Score is not recognizing that prompt change. Okay, so at the end of the day, if you have issues with anything that you can't do, log a support call with Microsoft. Don't try and solve it yourself. Call Microsoft. There is no cost to logging a support call. If you can't recover a folder from OneDrive like someone else was saying, log a support call with Microsoft. All they'll do at worst is say, we don't look after that. Now, if you can solve it before Microsoft does it, happy days, you've got a solution. But don't be afraid to log a call with Microsoft to work out why it is. Okay. So again, my advice to you with this, you should always set passwords to never expire. But again, if you have any questions or something doesn't line up in the tenant, again, just log a support call with Microsoft and find out. And remember that Secure Score is not an absolute. Okay, it's not going to be perfect all the time, and it's going to fluctuate and vary as the Microsoft stuff will do as it runs its evaluation. Okay, now also don't forget that Secure Score is going to take in things like the Azure AD apps. Right, so for example, let me share my screen. So again, the reason your password expiry thing may be an issue is because if you go out and have a look at, the wrong one. So if we go out and have a look at our Azure AD here, you will see that not only do you have user objects, right, you also have things called apps. If we go in here, have a look at our Azure AD, go into where is it? See enterprise applications here. These are all the applications that are connected to your tenant. Now, each of these could also potentially have a password, a login and a password. So remember that Secure Score is going to evaluate the total environment, not just the users that you see. So again, I would suggest to you that You have Ingram Micro for support. You have Microsoft for support as well. But as I said, Secure Score looks at the whole tenant, not just the user. And part of that issue with passwords expiring may be Azure AD app objects, not just user objects. Okay, any other questions in there? George has put a link into the for the Ingram Micro Modern support in there if you want to go and take advantage of that. Any other questions? Happy to answer any of them. You can come off mute, put your hand in the air virtually, and we can handle that. Thank you, Raymond. All right, well, what I'll do is there anything else that you want to add, George, before we end the recording for today?
No, I think we're fine. Thank you very much, Robert.
Cool. All right, well, I will stop the recording now.